for today, we don't have much time, but I think it would be worth maybe going through a quick round of intro. I'll start from my side at 2100 and then leave the stage to you. Quick agenda, I think that we'd like to cover essentially is sort of like an intro on your side, how you came to the idea of Lumina, sort of like a bit more about the plan. So going maybe quickly through, the product, what you're thinking, and so on and so forth. And then sort of like at the end, maybe we leave some space for specific questions, right, on the business and the progress and so on and so forth. So I'll quickly start on my side. Andrea, one of the partners of 2100. We are a European manager, invest in follower checks, pre-seed and seed, 200 to 500K in European founders across B2B, specifically fintech and infra, B2B SaaS and climate. We have 30 million to invest, and we are already sort of like at around 20 companies invested over the last year and a half. Basically, I mean, we like to invest in, as I said, in companies very early on. And of course, I mean, this is definitely something that, we actually look at the space, the ERP and so on. So I'll pause here on my side, maybe a quick intro on my side as well, but been basically working in product strategy for most of my career, mainly in fintech. So building B2B SaaS, I did an MBA at LBS and then worked for Connect Ventures and Atomico before 2100. With that, I'll pause and shut up and leave the stage to you to talk a bit more about Lumina, your intros and so on.
Nice. Thanks very much for the intro, Andrea. It's great to meet you. I'm Pascal. I'm the CTO of Lumina. I like to describe myself as a software engineer specializing in AI. So I spent the last 10 years, give or take, deploying AI in organizations, in particular to help more generally like streamline operations. I've done most of that at my previous company, Faculty, where I joined as a first engineer on the product team and then grew as the team grew to started as an IC, then became a tech lead, and then like director of engineering, where I was responsible for the engineering side of Faculty's product effort. And it's in that context that I met Juana, who I guess introduced herself in a second. Done many deployments of AI in that context. I think a career highlight is we worked closely with the hospital trust to deploy AI to help optimize patient allocations to beds, and this was mentioned in the House of Lords as a potential way to lift some of the inefficiencies that we see in the NHS at the moment. Juana?
Yeah, thanks, Pascal. Hey, Andrea, nice to meet you. I'm Juana. I'm the other co-founder of Lumina. As Pascal already said, him and I worked together at Faculty for over 6 years, I think. And I also joined as a designer and then worked my way up to head of product. And so him and I work very, very closely together pretty much every day, building the Faculty's platform from the ground up. Over that course, we also grew the product team to over 30 people and helped the company raise Series A. And so we kind of, we have very good, I would say, generative tension between the two of us. I'm a designer and product manager, and obviously Pascal's sort of engineering mindset. We complement each other very well. So we kind of always knew we wanted to build something together. So that was the kind of first part of the Lumina story. And then the second part is earlier this year, we're basically reflecting on every single deployment that we made of our product at Faculty. We always had to deploy typically on top of an existing ERP system, and we always, without fail, saw the teams effectively not really using that ERP and being back into spreadsheets, primarily because that ERP had been implemented many years before. It was clunky to use and very difficult to change. So the IT team had a huge backlog of various changes to make, and so it had become totally out of step with the business and the way they wanted to run their demand planning, supply planning processes, and so on. And so we started reflecting on this particular problem, and we think that now is an interesting inflection point in the market where this is actually a contractable problem because of the latest developments in generative AI. So our big bet is that large language models, because they can write code quite well these days, they can put those operators back in control of their own systems and allow for much more configurable and what we call adaptive software. So that's where we got the idea for Lumina, and in particular, kind of starting from small and mid-sized businesses, because those are super underserved at the moment. Obviously, they can't afford the big players like SAP and NetSuite. And starting with a product, again, that's natively using generative AI to enable non-technical users to kind of configure their operations like in a spreadsheet with the same flexibility, but have much more power by using commands in plain English to configure the system. So say, remind me when to pay a supplier, or what are my outstanding kind of accounts receivables from customers. So that's a little bit of the backdrop of Lumina.
Yeah, that's great. And what stage sort of like are you in the design? Like, is there like an MVP, or you're working towards that? Are you conducting customer interviews? Maybe if you want to also share something that you sort of like got in terms of output from interviews, or the kind of like discovery journeys you've done.
So we started working in April. We launched an MVP in early July. In the context of launching that MVP, and until now, we work very closely with our first design partner, who's a small pharmaceutical distributor based in Wales. And so we have a launched product that they actually do use now basically every day. We're very happy with the usage figures. We have a second design partner that's currently in a trial phase. That first design partner converted, so is now a paying customer. So that's the kind of product, the customer side. We're exploring go-to-market motions to make that a bit more scalable. And in terms of like investment and raising, we're in the final steps of closing a pre-seed round.
That's great. One question that I always had on tools like this, we've done a similar investment in the space on the ERP for SMEs and so on. We were always thinking about sort of like go to market from an implementation perspective, right? And specifically when you target markets that are pretty much diversified in terms of client base and so on. What are you observing maybe across sort of like clients or customers, potential customers?
Yeah, so our current experiment we're running is outreach to implementation, like supply chain consultants. So typically what happens with our target customers, which are small and mid-sized businesses that are fast growing and looking to scale, typically ex-family run businesses as well, is they'll reach out first to a consultant or an advisor because they don't have supply chain operational experts within their business already. And that person will advise on a range of things, including best practice processes, but also systems to replace typically spreadsheets. And so we're working with a number of supply chain consultants to sort of get through the door to those customers, but also empower the consultants themselves to configure Lumina so they don't have to also bring in an army of developers with them to implement an ERP for that business. So it's a sort of win-win, I guess, for the partner and for the end customer.
Yeah. And you think also as a way to go to market, to actually go through sort of like that channel partner through consulting and so on, or are you going to be direct?
I think in a first instance, we'll go through partners just because of, obviously their credibility and so on in the market. We obviously want to eventually have a more scalable kind of approach, but I think to get our foot through the door, this makes a lot of sense. And we basically established a couple of partnerships where, we're kind of jointly taking Lumina to the customer and they get a sort of implementation fee out of it as well. So they're incentivized to participate.
Yeah, that's great. And one question that I had on the product, I'm always thinking about sort of like what I call new units of value, but essentially is where the value is stored into the product, right? I think there's two sort of like approaches when it comes to sort of like ERPs and full-fledged sort of like solutions. Either they go for enterprise or SMEs and so on. Do you think there's more value in the sort of like LLM? You were mentioning that as a sort of like why now factor as well, but also as a technical competitive advantage. Do you see yourself sort of like creating more value out of the usage of LLM within the supply chain of your product? Or do you see more value in the bundling of a software for SMEs that has a sort of like GenAI / LLM component?
I think we see the value as having like an operating system that allows gradually increasing the degree of automation in a small business, right? So I think it's basically the LLM is a kind of a tool in that context, but the output is a increasingly automated, increasingly rigorous, increasingly kind of like well-defined processes on top of a clear data structure. Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always like when I think about these tools, there's an OS component, right? So if you're an SME, you're generally, let's call it unsophisticated or overly sophisticated because you go with your sort of like SAP or like major implementations, right? So the sweet spot is basically that you're targeting is basically that of being right in the middle, essentially, of being much more sophisticated than just an Excel spreadsheet, like many clients actually have, but also not actually needing the sort of implementation that you might have with an SAP and so on. So
That's
there
right.
is a value in the bundling aspect and
Yeah.
sort of like an interface and sort of like a product, right? The B2B SaaS and so on.
Yeah.
But the fact that you mentioned the LLM as part of the core of the building blocks of the tool, was very interesting because not many solutions that I've seen have a sort of like strong sort of like part of LLM
Yeah.
from the outset, right? Maybe they put it as part of the chain, but they don't
Totally.
sort of like highlight that, right? So that's why I wanted to touch
Yeah.
on this part.
Yep.
Yeah.
We definitely see the LLM as a core differentiator. Like you, we've obviously done a bunch of market research and customer discovery early on, and we see a lot of new next generation ERPs, so-called, but a lot of them basically focus a lot on, rightly, like the user experience, making it much more sort of intuitive and so on. But I haven't yet seen one that kind of is built from the ground up around an LLM, and we have lots of things to say around how we're doing that, both from a user experience and from a technical architecture perspective.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And maybe one last question from my side is basically on the sort of like geographical component of go-to-market and so on. Are you thinking like UK, Europe? What also are sort of like some points around strategy when it comes to markets?
Yeah, we're very focused at the moment on the UK and Europe, primarily because our network is here and our advisors who are introducing us to customers are here as well. We also think it's a vastly underserved market relative to the US. So we've spoken to a few prospects, and a lot of them are considering adopting ERPs that are, like US based, but the support and the handholding isn't there, obviously, because they don't have a presence in the UK. So that will certainly be our first focus.
Perfect. And maybe, one last point, have I forgot anything, right? Or is there something that I sort of like forgot to ask, or one thing that you'd like to add in terms of, where you are and the kind of like direction? It's kind of like, last minute type of thing, but if you want to add anything that I forgot to ask, it would be great. Even like unique insights and stuff like that.
I think maybe one thing is our target customer in particular that we're going after now are SMEs in sort of like manufacturing, wholesale, and logistics, primarily because the operations are complex enough that they can't be managed in spreadsheets, but also the nuances of those types of businesses are sufficiently different from each other that they can't be served by a standard sort of one-fits-all ERP.
Amazing. I mean, you were mentioning the closing of the proceeds, so it's it's great to see that sort of like thing happening, especially for exactly, fingers crossed. But for founders, is a great way to prove that there's sort of like substance to it. So it's it's congrats for that as well. I mean, if there's maybe one last point before we close, but what are the things that you actually need more help with? If people wanted to reach out and so on, and sort of like offer some help and so on, are there specific things that you really sort of like want to get at this stage?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, especially in the kind of focal context. So there's a couple of things. So the pre-seed round is fingers crossed mostly under control. We're interested in meeting people ahead of, we're going to target a seed round if things go well in the next 12 to 18 months. We're very keen to talk to people in investors in that context. And then separately, we're always looking for mentorship or advice on like principally go-to-market. And we are looking for introductions into small business or introductions to operations consultants. So to summarize, like investor conversations ahead of a seed round, mentorship on go-to-market, and intros into small business or intros into operations consultants.
Fantastic. Now, guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, and best of luck.
Thank you very much, Andrea.
Thanks very much. It was great meeting you.
Pleasure.
Yeah.